Welcome to the Sirius report. This is Paul, and today I'm asking the question, or less a question, the statement, why Xi Jinping is on a mission to finally end US hegemony in Southeast Asia. Now, I'm sure everybody is aware of the fact, or many people will be at least, that Xi Jinping's on a tour of three nations in Southeast Asia, namely Vietnam, Cambodia, and also Malaysia. Now, it's no coincidence that this is coming on the back of all the recent developments with respect to tariffs and US tariff policy with respect to China and other nations across the world. Now, Xi Jinping's mission is quite simple: to highlight to countries who are already allies that the future is multipolarity, that unipolarity no longer has any place in the world. And as a consequence of that, they've signed a whole raft of deals with each of these countries and basically laid down a mark that the future is about cooperation in every capacity that will allow both countries to have win-win, or in a multilateral sense, for win-win across the board. It is about resolving differences in a mutual, respectful way, and to be able to live with differences that sometimes are unresolvable, but in the end, they're not as important as the fact there are 50 other reasons why the relationship is very solid. There is no need to choose sides. If countries in Southeast Asia want to have a relationship with the United States, that's fine. But the United States needs to learn that it isn't about a zero-sum game anymore. Now, with respect to the US policy and China, it's been self-evident for a number of years the US is doing everything it possibly can to get China to bite with respect to Taiwan, to invade the island. Why? The reasons are quite simple: that it can then say to the world, look, China is an aggressor. They've invaded an island. They're a sovereign state, which will, as far as the United States is concerned, that's exactly what it will be at that point in time, even though they've stated for a long time they believe in the one China principle, and that, of course, therefore, Taiwan is inalienably linked to China. But, of course, thus far, that's failed to materialize. The United States seems to be getting more and more desperate, and therefore is now realizing that the chance of getting China to bite with regards to Taiwan is becoming more and more problematic, more and more unlikely. Therefore, there isn't really an option for a proxy war, as what we saw with respect to Europe and Ukraine and Russia. And therefore, the only other option is an economic war, which, of course, the United States is not going to win either in any way, shape, or form. But therefore, there's always been this emphasis to try and upset the apple cart in Southeast Asia, to try and get nations to be resistant to China, to put obstacles in China's way. The Philippines is a classic example of this. But nations like Cambodia, Malaysia, and Vietnam are not going to fall for that, and they've not done so. And they've made their position very, very clear with respect to their belief in China, their desire to develop relations with China, and to forge ahead in a multipolar world where Southeast Asia collectively is going to be arguably the dominant economic force for 10, 20, 50, who knows how many years that will be the case, because there are other developments throughout the whole world, where Africa being one nation who is going to grow enormously in the years to come. And for that matter, you can include South America and basically the entire global South. Now, what I wanted to do was focus on the visit of Xi Jinping to Malaysia and list the kind of developments and statements that have come out. And these are things you would never see the United States ever sign agreements with other countries in any way, shape, or form. You often hear statements and then they're largely forgotten. And then maybe a year or two years later, people reflect upon the fact that where all these statements made about how they were going to invest in these projects, or there was going to be this big development, remember, in the Middle East, which was going to connect India to Europe. We've simply heard nothing since. Whereas in contrast, China goes all over the world and signs these enormous agreements with other countries, including, of course, with Malaysia. They signed an agreement with 41 different points in it. And it's interesting, the Malaysian president, Anwar, came out and said he witnessed the exchange of the memorandum of understanding between the government of Malaysia and the government of China in fields that have strategic importance to two friendly countries. Now, people will argue these don't mean anything, but they absolutely do. And these are in areas, for example, in terms of global security initiatives, what has been termed global civilization initiatives. Also, there is development in terms of the implementation of global development initiatives. Also, visa-free travel sounds irrelevant, but it's not. Then there's also the establishment of joint bilateral dialogue in the fields of foreign affairs and defense. Also, in terms of cooperation in trade, and also to promote this China-Malaysia two countries, two parks initiative. Also in the railway sector, phytosanitary protocols to do with food and agricultural security. Also the construction of joint laboratories in a whole raft of new technologies. Also, there's going to be cooperation on the application of the Chinese Beidou satellite system technology. Also, there is going to be to do with AI, China-Malaysia joint laboratory. Also, there is this with respect to tourism, heritage. Also, there's going to be cooperation in the media. And in addition, there's also going to be cooperation with respect in a big way in artificial intelligence, also in the development of a digital economy, intellectual property, a whole raft of MOUs between various academic institutions in both countries. And of course, there is various developments with respect to the media. And this is just an example of how comprehensive these agreements are, and why countries in Southeast Asia know when they're onto a good thing. They know when it's a good opportunity for them to develop relations with the Chinese. Yes, of course, there are ongoing issues to do with the South China Sea or the East Sea and the Code of Conduct, and these need to be resolved, absolutely. And they need to be resolved in an amicable way. But in no way, shape, or form does that therefore mean that these countries should then have the United States railroading in, deciding to cause all manner of conflict, of trying to divide and conquer countries in the region by setting up things like the Quad Alliance and looking to drag as many nations as they can into conflict with China by putting missiles in off Japanese islands, by trying to increase military presence in South Korea, and also trying to create conflicts in the South China Sea. And then, as usual, the United States is the one who throws the first punch. And then when they get hit back in some way, they claim to be the victim. Now, the thing about the global South and Southeast Asia is they're far too intelligent to fall for this nonsense. And that's why the US is not going to be able to rely upon, like they do in Europe, the EU countries who are vassal states. And if the United States says jump, they all ask how high. That is simply never going to happen. And that is something that the United States is still trying to come to terms with and realize that the idea of spreading its form of hegemony in Southeast Asia is going to be virtually impossible, and almost arguably completely impossible, because the depth of the relationship between all the countries is enormous. They have the RCEP, as another example, a big trade pact. They also have the trade pact between the ASEAN countries, who are now going to sign an agreement for free trade with the Chinese in the future. And there is a whole raft of other alliances that is all about solidifying cooperation in the economy, in the financial system, in also to do with the military and security. And they'll form these unbreakable bonds. And the timing, therefore, of Xi going to these countries shouldn't be underestimated. It is not a coincidence he's going now. Yes, the argument will be, well, they're signing these enormous raft of agreements with all these different countries. You don't just have those appearing in the blink of an eye, and that's true, you don't. They will have been meticulously prepared for a number of months. But they could have just as easily have had this visit in 4 weeks' time or 6 weeks' time. They've probably expedited the fact of when this visit happened to make a very firm point to the United States, and also that these countries will trade freely with each other, and they're looking to get free trade agreements everywhere, or those that aren't at very low tariffs, and making a point to the United States, look, we don't have to trade with you. Rather like the Chinese can stop trading with the United States, so can other countries. And we can trade with each other. The United States, has 350 million people. The world is 8 billion people. We don't need you. Yes, we'd like to work with you, and we'd like to cooperate with you. That is absolutely clear. But in no way, shape, or form do we have to do so. We will only do so if it's on the basis of mutual trust, win-win cooperation, and that you actually decide to treat us with decency and respect, and not as a doormat, as they perfectly understand the European Union countries are treated. This part of the world has everything going for it that the West doesn't. It has low cost of living matrix. It has relatively low inflation. It has enormous resources. It has a young population. It has populations that are rapidly becoming more educated. And it has enormous potential for economic growth. People are not maxed out on debt. The nations are not maxed out on debt. And once they break free of using the dollar, which they increasingly are with each other, then also that affords them a lot more flexibility in terms of their financing and their economies, and they're not therefore at the whim of the likes of the IMF, etc. And that is what has been developments that have been going on for 20 years. We've been discussing it publicly for over a decade, and also in our subscription podcast, where we've detailed all the major developments in the multipolar world. This visit is another example of this, but when you listen to the statements that are being made, and the desire of these countries is to be able to finally step out from the shadow of the United States, to be autonomous, to be able to be free to trade with each other, and to be free as sovereign countries, and not to be vassal states, which to some extent countries like Japan, South Korea are. Also, to some extent, the Philippines has become a vassal state again, and is of no benefit to these countries whatsoever. The future is the multipolar world, that is with cooperation amongst all the countries, amongst billions of people. And it's not all about China, and it never has been, and it never will be. But Xi has made a very important statement by visiting these countries and going himself. And I think you can expect more of this in the future. And that's why I thought it was a really important subject to discuss today. And with that, we end this podcast. Thank you very much for listening. For all your support, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Please spread the word. We're trying to get people to better understand the realities of what is going on in the world. And as ever, and this is very important, we have never lived in an age where being informed far outweighs anything that entertainment can provide. And with that, I'll say goodbye.